The 10th of November, 1918. Kaiser Wilhelm II boards a train destined for a foreign land, fleeing both the enemy and the wrath of his own people. The account of the once mighty German Empire was, for all practical purposes, closed. But how did it come to this point? I'm the Enlightened Edelweiss, and this is the second of a series of videos centered around the decline and fall of the German Empire. If you haven't watched the first episode, be sure to do so. The link can be found on the top right corner of the screen. We last left off in 1890, at the dismissal of the long-standing Chancellor and bastion of German stability, Bismarck. Wilhelm had finally managed to remove the thorn from his side and could now pursue his real aims. Policy after Bismarck experienced a monumental shift. Wilhelm was frequently on vacation, and that, coupled with a host of other ceremonial duties, kept him away from ruling the nation directly for most of the time. Therefore, it could certainly be argued that the blame for certain disastrous policy decisions cannot be attributed directly to Wilhelm. It would be incorrect, however, to suggest that Wilhelm and his influence had absolutely no hand in the matter. The chancellors following Bismarck were more of administrators rather than experienced politicians, and they had no choice but to go along with the Kaiser's will for fear of losing their jobs. This was no simple task, of course, since the Kaiser was frequently not in Berlin, meaning that his wishes were often not that clear. Count Eulenberg summed up the difficulties of working with the Kaiser quite nicely in a note to Bernhard von Bülow, saying that Wilhelm II takes everything personally. Only personal arguments make any impression on him. He likes to give advice to others, but is unwilling to take it himself. He cannot stand boredom. Ponderous, stiff, excessively thorough people get on his nerves and cannot get anywhere with him. Wilhelm II wants to shine and to do and decide everything himself. What he wants to do himself, unfortunately, often goes wrong. He loves glory. He is ambitious and jealous. To get him to accept an idea, one has to pretend that the idea came from him. During Bismarck's absence, his carefully constructed system of alliances that had served Germany so well was allowed to fall. In 1887, the reinsurance treaty with Russia collapsed. This left Russia free to pursue better diplomatic relations with France, eventually leading to the alliance that would fight against Germany in the First World War. It also created a greater dependency on the Austro-Hungarian Empire, once again another key component in the road to the First World War. Though perhaps the most significant change in policy following Bismarck's fall was the adoption of Weltpolitik in 1897. This was a policy that focused on building Germany into a great power on the world stage through the acquisition of overseas colonies, and was spearheaded by Bernhard von Bülow. Eulenberg remarked that Bülow's task was to satisfy Germany without injuring the emperor, essentially saying that it was to make Germany an imperial power without making a fool out of the Kaiser. The extent to which this was achieved is debatable, as Germany did gain certain colonies, however they were hardly worth the money put into the effort. There were several reasons for the sudden interest in the acquisition of a colonial empire. Firstly, as Germany began to industrialize, there was a greater need for raw materials that could easily be sourced from colonies. Additionally, German nationalists increasingly felt that the only way for Germany to remain a dominant power in Europe would be through colonial expansion. For them, it was a matter of prestige, and they began to exert pressure on the government to move in that direction. However, in reality, Weltpolitik did not simply mean colonial gains. It also involved the monumental expansion of the German Navy, which until then had not been very noteworthy. In 1897, Alfred von Tirpitz was appointed Secretary of the Navy and was tasked with its expansion. This, of course, posed a direct challenge to the United Kingdom. Not only was Germany building up a sizable colonial empire, but it was also building up a fleet to rival theirs. On top of that, it certainly didn't help that upon the failure of the Jameson Raid, which was an attempt by the British to instigate a revolt in the Transvaal Republic, Wilhelm sent a telegram to the President of the Republic, Paul Kruger, congratulating him on the repelling of the raid. This infuriated the British and led to a souring of relations. These failures of Anglo-German relations led Britain to look elsewhere for alliances, chiefly with France. In 1904, Britain signed the Entente Cordiale, ending decades of Anglo-French colonial disputes with the stroke of a pen. The situation was beginning to look threatening to Germany. This new Germany's neglect of Bismarck's stable policies was coming back to bite it, as alliances and agreements formed on either side of their borders. Bismarck's fear of a nightmare of coalitions was slowly but steadily being realized. Thus, Wilhelmine Germany marched yet another step toward the gallows.